Hello, my friends. Today we're going to talk Israel-Palestine. I want to get right to this. It's a very kind of complicated process. We're going to go over a legal case brought by the country of South Africa against Israel. The first order of business, so just for a little bit of historical, I'm only going to go back to October 7, 2023. That's when the current crisis kind of escalated. And on that day, and it's always been a curious situation to explain, on that day, Hamas launched an attack against Israel where, they just a barrage of rockets that they fired, and they breached this border wall and went into different villages and kidnapped people, killed people. And there was like a music festival that they went into and were shooting. Now, everybody condemns that attack, especially taking hostages. Everybody condemns it. And one of the things that I've been wondering is how it took the Israeli Defense Forces 8 hours to get there. Israel is a very small country, and the border with Gaza, you would think they would have it fortified, and they didn't. And we're only talking 25 miles of border. That's it. It's not like the United States-Mexico border here. There's just 25 miles. How the heck, according to the reports, the Palestinians were there and attacking for 8 hours. 8 hours before the Israeli army could get there. And like I said, it's a very, very small place. To me, that didn't seem very competent, okay? Have you ever seen the movie Casino, Mateo?
Robert De Niro?
Yes, Robert De Niro. I love this part in the casino where Robert De Niro was like yelling at this guy that did that was supposed to oversee the slot machines. And he said, how can you let all the jackpots happen like within a matter of minutes? Either you are in on this or you're so incompetent, right? Either way, you are out.
Get your ass and get your things and get out of here.
You're firing me?
I'm firing you.
And that's kind of how I feel about how the Israeli Defense Forces, their little history about what happened that day. So what did they do? Their leader, who was in turmoil at the time, Netanyahu, instead of saying to him, hey, you're either incompetent and you're out, or, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not one that's going to be here saying that, he was in on this so that they could do all this. So at best, he's incompetent and he should be out. Instead, he's the one that's leading Israel in this whole war. So after this happened on October 7, the defense forces went into heavy offensive forces. All right. And that is what the South Africa and a lot of other countries, like several other countries, are saying that what ended up happening now is nothing short of a pure genocide, pure genocide. Which is a very, very big accusation, right? And here, this accusation is being brought by South Africa against Israel in the International Court of Justice, commonly just called the ICJ. So the first order of business is jurisdiction, all right? The jurisdiction here is a very interesting part. It's not, every time I talk about jurisdiction with the American cases, it's like the state court, the federal court, and all of that. The ICJ, their jurisdiction is it just so happens that, and the ICJ traces back before the United Nations, like even the League of Nations, they had some courts that they were starting to set up like after World War I, and then after World War II, they kind of solidified it a little bit better. The jurisdiction here is just that several or almost all the countries in the world signed on to be a part of this court, so that they can, when there's disputes between the other members, like the other countries, instead of fighting out in war, theoretically, they can go to this court and then they could haggle, not haggle, but sue each other or have cases adjudicated in this court. And then the goal would be that the countries follow those orders that the court has. But the court does not have its own military, or nothing to speak about, nothing to brag about, that's for sure. So there isn't really a great way for the court to enforce anything. It would kind of be like Zeke, like me and you kind of hanging out with Mateo and us three just getting together and saying this is illegal, right? I mean, it's a lot better than that, but they don't have their own military. Now, when the state of California, when they have a court hearing, they do have their own military. I mean, we call it the police, like they can have, like, if the state of California says, okay, we will allow this landlord to evict this tenant, and if the tenant doesn't leave, what I've told people in the past, the sheriff is going to come with a rifle saying you got an hour to get out of here, sooner or later. So that is like the strongest enforcement. If you have a judgment against you, you're not paying it, you own a house, sooner or later the state can take your house, right? Via a lien and go to the bank, take the title. Like, there's all these enforcement mechanisms. So here, this court doesn't have that type of good enforcement mechanism. So I say this because that's my, that's the jurisdiction. They don't have that enforcement. Okay, all right, let's move on. So what is it that South Africa is saying here in this lawsuit that they brought? It's kind of a funny term, lawsuit. It's between two countries, but okay. In this petition and lawsuit that they brought against the country of Israel. In 1948, the United Nations, they adopted a kind of anti-genocide. There was a convention in Geneva, and it was, they called it the Convention and Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And the goal was, obviously, after World War II, that we're going to rid the world of genocide, right? Like, it's not going to happen again. And then South Africa, that's why every country is allowed, as a member and as a signator and as a part of the International Court of Justice, they're allowed to bring their own lawsuit against another country. And what South Africa is alleging in this lawsuit is that Israel has had 75 years, so since its inception, an apartheid government. That's kind of South Africa's alleging that, right? Everyone knows the history of South Africa here. So you have South Africa alleging that this country is operating as an apartheid government. You know that they pronounce that word so many different ways. How do you pronounce that in Texas? Apartheid, yeah. So apartheid. Some people say apartheid. I think the way it's pronounced in South Africa, right? It was apartheid. Okay. And then they're accusing Israel of being 56 years of occupying the Palestinians, and then the last 16 years of having a blockade against the whole area of Gaza, kind of like by both land and sea, and that they are destroying the Gazan people. All right, so now we are going to, and of course, Israel did defend itself here, and the International Court basically did not agree with Israel's defenses, but here's the Israeli defenses. Well, first they called South Africa the legal arm of terrorists, okay, of Hamas. And then they said that, well, we do keep, the reason why a lot of civilians are dying is because the Hamas uses humans as shields. And so that instead of, barricading themselves, underground in a place that's safe from civilians, they use the civilians as human shields. And that's why there's so many civilians dying. Israel also said we're providing and we're allowing ample humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. And that we are defending ourselves and trying to get back, the hostages that were taken. And there are at least 100 or 140 hostages still remaining, from the Gazan side. Of course, the people of Gaza and the South Africa, they say that on the Israeli side, they're holding thousands and thousands of hostages. They're holding them in without charges, without due process, without a trial. So okay, now let's get to the nitty gritty of this. The first order of business, it was about a week after October 7 that Israel announced that they wanted 1 million people. It was actually more than 1 million people to evacuate the north part of Gaza and go to the south. In my lifetime, I've never heard of an evacuation order of 1 million people. Have you, Mateo, ever heard of that? I've heard of sometimes like there's like a flood zone or something, and they'll say like this little particular neighborhood should evacuate, or if there's a tornado coming or something. But to tell 1 million people, now get this. So if you think of if you divide Gaza into two, and let's say there's about 1 million people living in the north and 1 million people living in the south. If you tell all 1 million people in the north to go to the south, that is pretty intense because now you're going to displace everybody, you know, both the north and the south, because now the south has all of a sudden all these people coming in, and it was a disaster. And then the South Africa alleges, and they say they have evidence and photos and videos and all this, that during this evacuation order, there was some routes that the Israelis said, oh, go on these routes to go from the north to the south, these roads and these routes and this and that. And then those routes were bombed. Within a short amount of time, the estimation was that 6,000 bombs were being dropped on Gaza every week. That is nuts, because Gaza itself is about 25 miles long and maybe 5 miles wide. It's about 140 square miles, which is a very small amount. So to be dropping 6,000 bombs per week is basically just destroying everything, right? And this is what the South African government is saying. And that when I was talking about the evacuation order of the north, they told everyone to go to the south, but then they started bombing the heck out of the south too. So a big part of this lawsuit is that there's nowhere safe for the Palestinian refugees to go. In fact, when they would go to refugee camps, several refugee camps got bombed, which is a tough one, right? Because where are the people supposed to go? They don't have anywhere to go. That is I think if there was one sentence that they would take out of this, that's where it is. They have nowhere to go. The healthcare system has been decimated completely in Gaza, and that, because various hospitals were being bombed. And the thing with the hospitals being bombed. Now, remember what I said about October 7th. I don't have that much faith in the competence of the IDF, especially after, it took them 8 hours to get here, there, and supposedly their intelligence had no clue that this was going to all happen. So when they say, yeah, we bombed the hospital, we bombed the refugee camp because there was a terrorist there. There was someone from Hamas was there. It's hard for me to gauge the accuracy of that because I don't trust the deal that much. Plus, even if there is one fighter in a refugee camp, obviously he's not fighting, right? He's in a refugee camp and doesn't present a danger, or at least not an imminent danger. He's not like a soldier or a troop with a gun, like kind of trying to cross the border at the time, or he's not shooting at Israeli soldiers, right? So to bomb a refugee camp when they're saying that somebody there is not supposed to be there. And then the other thing that the Israeli counterpoints to this lawsuit is that in a lot of circumstances, there are reasons to bomb a hospital or a church or a mosque, universities, because these underground tunnels exist where there are weapons being stored and things like that. I think that that is a good argument. I mean, it is, right? I think that part of this lawsuit is that Israel has to then, substantiate those claims. And it's clear from the judgment of the court that those claims weren't completely substantiated, okay? And that it wasn't, the case that all of these bombs or a lot of them were justified, especially these residential areas. The Israelis have said in their defense over and over, it's like, well, why are the Gaza, why are they hiding under these areas? And part of it could be because there's it's such a small part. Such a small piece of land. Also, even during peacetime, it's not like Gaza could, they're not allowed. They're blockaded and they're not allowed to have an open military. So it's not, the whole military had to exist over the decades underground, basically. Okay, so anyway, but the bottom line is, I think that because the International Court of Justice had a trial, they reviewed the evidence, they examined witnesses, they did all of that, right? And they didn't substantiate those claims. If they came back and said, Israel claimed that there are, everywhere they bombed, especially when it would go after a hospital or refugee camp, that underneath were the Gazan military, and they were fighting and they were launching their rockets from there and things like that. Then the judgment from the international court would have been much different. All right. So here in this lawsuit, there are a lot of it's pretty crazy. Like it's actually, if you want to learn the history of you could read this lawsuit. I'll post it in the links, but they go back, the South African government in this lawsuit, and they go back and kind of say, what's been happening over the last several decades in that area. And they're building a case that Israel has maintained this apartheid system where the Israelis are given a big preference over the Palestinians, and that it has to be considered because the Palestinians are under the occupation of the Israelis. So it's a situation where the Israeli citizens have the better access. And one of the things is the natural resources like water, electricity. It's in the lawsuit, and the court found that it was accurate, that it was disproportionately maintained the natural resources in favor of Israelis as opposed to the Palestinians. Okay, after October 7 and in this current war, I'm going to read a few quotes here. Alongside its military campaign, Israel has engaged in the dehumanization and cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment of members of Palestinians in Gaza. Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, have reportedly been arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress, and remain outside in the cold weather before being forced on trucks and taken to unknown locations. Medics and first responders in particular have been repeatedly detained by Israeli forces, with many being detained incognito at unknown locations. Again, that's a big accusation, right? Judging from the court's ruling, that those allegations were substantiated. Mass expulsion from homes and displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. It's estimated that about 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million, that's about almost 90% of the whole population, has been forced out of their homes. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have been killed, or they're at extreme risk of being killed. A lot of the problem is that there's just, like I said before, there's nowhere to go. So even if you have to evacuate your house, you have nowhere to go. There's no, proper refugee camps and proper places for all these folks to go. Palestinians fleeing the north pursuant to Israeli evacuation orders were urged to move south along Gaza's main traffic artery, and then there's this particular road that they mentioned, on certain days during certain designated hours. However, there were numerous instances of shelling along the routes and violence by the Israelis during the evacuation times. Again, it was substantiated. For many Palestinians, a forced evacuation from their homes is necessary. Israel has now damaged or destroyed about 350,000 homes, amounting to about 60% of the entire housing stock. So at the time of this complaint, which was December 29, 2023, about 60% of the homes were destroyed in Gaza. Deprivation of access to adequate water and food. There's a big portion here that's saying that the blockade, Israel controls the water that goes in and out of Gaza, and they basically stopped it during this whole time, and that there's inadequate food and water going to this area. A lot of people are starving to death there. The South African government alleges here. Water is also severely depleted. Israel continues to cut off piped water for north of Gaza, and the North's water desalination plant is not functioning. They estimate that each person has about 1.5 liters of water, up to 2 liters of water per day for everything: drinking, washing, preparing food, sanitation, hygiene. 2 liters, less than 2 liters. Have you ever, you remember like a 2 liter of Coke, Mateo? You ever, right? So that's it for the whole day, for drinking, for taking a shower, for preparing your food, hygiene, whatever. So that That's pretty low, right? Okay, I don't mean to laugh. I just, it's supposed to be a fun show, Mateo, but this one's a tough one. Okay, and then since early December 2023, Israeli army attacks on Palestinian hospitals have been increasing. The Israeli army has continued to attack and besiege hospitals and healthcare centers to deprive them of electricity and fuel crucial to maintain effective functioning and equipment. And then they go on. There's just it's hard to relay, but they kind of go on and say that even the like the prenatal care systems were out of electricity and those were cut off, which is, I mean, that's the future generations. And they make a point of that, saying that a lot of this is kind of intentionally ruining, future generations. Israel has left Gaza City's main public library in ruins. They bombed the library. It's also damaged or destroyed countless bookstores, publishing houses, libraries, and universities. All 4 universities have been bombed, which has trained generation of doctors and engineers, destroying campuses for education of future generations of Palestinians in Gaza. And so why is that important? Obviously, this is universities. And so what the government here is maintaining is that the bombing and the kind of the way it's going about, it's not just trying to get rid of Hamas or just trying to defend Israel. It's kind of like a calculated way to really end Gaza in the future, or really hurt the whole country in the future. Then what I found interesting is they're saying, okay, well, they anticipated that the defense, would say, well, that we're trying just to get rid of Hamas. We have nothing against the civilians of Gaza, and we want the civilians to flourish. We have nothing against them. Then they quote government officials. So here we go. The Prime Minister of Israel said on October 13, "We are striking our enemies with unprecedented might. Understand the scope of the mission to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters who have risen against Israel to destroy us." The president of Israel said, "It's absolutely true. We will fight until we break their backbone." The Israeli Minister of Finance said, "We need to deal a blow that hasn't been seen in 50 years and take down Gaza." Israeli Minister of Agriculture. I don't know why the Minister of Agriculture has to get involved, Zeke. Well, you tell me, right? On the 11th of November, he said in a television interview that we are now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. The Nakba means how they in 1948 got the war to get Israel started. This is the Israeli Army Reservist Major General. The people should be told that they have 2 choices: to stay and to starve, or to leave. So here, destroying their backbone and destroying them is talking about the leadership, So I don't think, actions are louder than words, so to speak. So to me, I don't think it's that convincing, the actual quotes. To me, it's like, it's rhetoric. Government officials say certain things. So in my view, I think the actual actions are a big deal. I think the quotes are not that big a deal. So where do we go now? There hasn't been a ceasefire. The hostages, the claimed about 14,000 hostages being held by Israel without trial, without due process. Some kids as young as 9, 10, 11 years old. Those, they're still in Israeli camps and prisons. And then same with the about 140 or however many they are. It could be a little less, could be a little more, hostages being held by the Palestinians. There hasn't been an exchange of all of the hostages, which I think, I hope to God that happens today, right? I mean, any day now, please. Or at least have trials by the Israelis if they're claiming some of them did certain things. The International Court of Justice, the United Nations, in my opinion, is an absolute, just right now, a joke, I would say, a pretty bad joke. Like, they don't do anything. They can't do anything. There's no military. There's no way for them to enforce. And then they have a Security Council of 15 members. And anytime, there's been about 2 or 3 times where the Security Council has urged a ceasefire by Israel. meaning, like having the Israelis just stop bombing. And the United States kept vetoing it. There's 5 countries that have an automatic veto in the Security Council: United States, England, France, China, and Russia. So when you have those countries, any one of them could veto anything. It's like, what's the point of the United Nations? I think they have a long way to go, the United Nations. I think if they're ever going to have any sort of real legitimacy, they have to have a better military, because they can't enforce. The only thing they could enforce is if it's some small countries fighting each other, where those countries don't have a veto, or those countries' allies, like here, the Israeli ally of the United States being a veto. I just don't, either they got to change the rules about the vetoes, which I don't see happening because those 5 powerful countries won't allow that. And if they don't change that, then the United Nations has to have some sort of military. Otherwise, I don't see the jurisdiction, the power of the jurisdiction behind the International Court of Justice. Like I said, it's a little to a lot better than me, Zeke, and Mateo just saying, okay, we think this is a genocide. We don't think this is a genocide. Like, who's going to listen to us, Mateo? My 1,000 subscribers, maybe. But they're not going to do anything for it, right? They might just hear it.
They might comment.
They might comment. If I'm lucky, they'll comment, right? But they won't do anything. So here, it's the same sort of concept. The International Court of Justice has no real, real fight behind it. I would love to hear what you think. And as always, see you next week.